Good afternoon, and thank you all for hanging in there for what's been a long and I think very productive day. I'm very pleased to introduce our next guest speaker, the Governor of New Jersey, the Honorable Chris Christie. Governor Christie was elected Governor of New Jersey in 2009. Upon taking office, Governor Christie inherited a significant financial mess and an unsustainable budget. Without raising taxes, Governor Christie has worked with legislators of both parties to put New Jersey on the right track to restoring fiscal sanity. His ability to make tough decisions for the good of the state inspired many governors who ran in 2010, including myself. In fact, I want to say that in 2010, Governor Christie was gracious enough to come to Iowa and speak at a special event for Lieutenant Governor Reynolds and I, and we were all very impressed and inspired by his message. Governor Christie has been one of the most vocal governors about common sense reforms of education. He calls the coming year the year of education reform and is committed to ensuring all students in the state of New Jersey, regardless of zip code, graduate from high school and are college or career ready. New Jersey spends more money per pupil than almost any other state and saw an increase of $850 million in education aid thanks to Governor Christie's budget. The governor has been extremely vocal about the sizable achievement gap for low-income and minority students in his state and the need to address that achievement gap. It is my distinct honor and privilege to introduce my friend, the Governor of New Jersey, the Honorable Chris Christie. Thank you. Thank you. Appreciate it.
Thank you very much. Thank you, Governor Branstad, for the introduction, and thank you to all of you for caring enough about this issue that is so central to our state's future and our country's future to commit your careers to it and to commit your time to it today. Now, I think we spend a lot of time on this issue, unfortunately, talking about the things that we disagree about. We spend a lot of time focused on the issues that divide us in terms of the future of the educational system of our country. And I think as we move towards a very key time in our country's history, with governors across America looking for ways to try to improve educational opportunity for all of our children, regardless of where they live, that we need to start focusing more on the things that unite us. For instance, there's been great conversation across our state in my first year as governor about the fact that I cut $820 million from the K-12 education budget in New Jersey. I did. I did because I had to. I did because I had an $11 billion budget deficit, and that nearly 1/3 of the money that we spend in our state budget is spent on state support of K-12 education. So if you have an $11 billion budget deficit, it's like, it used to be said about why you rob banks. You rob banks because that's where the money is. And in New Jersey, the money has been spent in public education. There's been less time, though, spent in the last number of months talking about what we've done since that time. This year, we increased funding to K-12 education, as Governor Branstad mentioned, by $850 million in a budget that we kept level in overall spending year to year. Now, what's that tell us about what should unite every aspect of this discussion about educational reform and improvement? I don't oppose funding public schools, and I don't favor the privatization of public schools. I'm a product of the public schools in my state. I dealt with a difficult economic and fiscal circumstance and did so in a straightforward and honest way. and got great opposition for doing it in certain quarters because we try to demonize each other. And they say, well, I cut that money because I hate public education. I cut that money because I had to balance the books. And the proof of that is not that I said it at the time, and there are plenty of people who are unwilling to take me at my word. The proof is what I did the next year when economic times were better. I restored every dollar of that cut and added an additional $30 million. Now keep this in context. This is in the context of a state that in the year where I cut the $820 million, where we spent $25 billion in that year on K-12 education. Nearly $10 billion from state resources and $15 billion from property taxpayers in New Jersey. In New Jersey, we spend $17,800 per pupil per year. It is the most of any state in America. And that's before the $850 million that I added this year. I would think that that's a place where we start right there, where we can find unity. We can find unity over the fact that everyone in New Jersey, and I suspect nearly everyone in Iowa, wants to invest in our children's future. So let's put aside the hyperbole about who likes or dislikes public education. I'm putting the money of the people of our state where my mouth is and increasing aid to K-12 education to record levels, more than was being spent on the day I became governor in January of 2010. Now the question is, how do we spend that money? Not whether we should spend that money. How do we spend that money? And let me give you a few examples from New Jersey about why the time for change is now. In the city of Newark, our largest city, we spend nearly $24,000 per pupil per year. And for the children who entered high school this past academic year, 23% of them will graduate in 4 years. 23%. And of that 23%, of the ones that go on to pursue higher education, 95% of them will need at least 1 year of remedial training to qualify to sit in a college classroom. That's an obscenity. It's an obscenity in terms of our resources that are wasted, but to me, much more importantly, it's an obscenity for the children of Newark and their families who are being consigned to that failure because of their zip code, because their economic circumstances do not permit them to make any other choice except to send their children to failure factory after failure factory. In the city of Camden, in the shadow of Philadelphia, we spend nearly $20,000 per pupil per year, and we have astonishing rates of failure, even worse than those in the city of Newark. In the city of Asbury Park, which some of you might be familiar with from Bruce Springsteen fame, the greetings we bring you from Asbury Park, New Jersey now are much different than the greetings that Bruce brought you in 1973. We spend nearly $30,000 per pupil per year in Asbury Park. And the last full academic year of testing that was available shows that less than 50% of the high school students can do math at an 8th grade level. At an 8th grade level. Now, I don't know how you define failure, but that seems pretty clear to me to be the definition of failure. Forget about who you want to blame for a second. Forget about whether you want to blame the local board of education, or the school superintendent, or the local district principals, or the teachers in front of the classroom, or the parents at home who don't care enough, or the kids who may not study enough. Let's put that aside for a second, and let's see what we can agree on. Can't we agree that that is failure? And that when you're confronted with that measure of failure, you need to do a self-examination and to bring about change? Yet in the yelling and screaming that's going on about education in this country, we miss that. That is failure. And that failure has real-life ramifications for those children. They are the ones whose future are now restricted by the fact that if they even get a high school diploma, the one that they get doesn't represent a true high school education, and they are limited in what they can do with their futures. Think of the parents who have no choice but to sit by and watch as their children are consigned to a life of grave limit in a country that is supposed to stand for a future that's limited only by your God-given gifts and your willingness to work as hard as you can to make the most of those gifts. How can we live in a country that's permitting that to happen right under our nose while we spend a king's ransom for that failure? So I hope we can agree that K-12 education is worth investing a good portion of our treasure with, and in New Jersey, more than any other state in America. That we can agree that there is failure in front of us. Is there also success? Of course there is. In many school districts in New Jersey, we have great success that we're very proud of. But we cannot be proud of our educational system as a state until we can replicate that success everywhere. And we have to stop blaming parents for this failure. It is the easiest out in the world, even though it is a valid point, to say that involved parents make better students. Of course they do. Involved parents make better human beings too. But the question is this: in many of our cities where families are crumbling, is it an excuse? Is it a justifiable excuse to say because parents are uninvolved, our hands are clean? There's nothing we can do to help those children. That's the response I hear all the time from opponents of real reform. What about the parents? Well, I'd love to motivate more parents to be more involved with their children. But I also know that government has its limits in that regard. But it should not be a morally acceptable excuse for us to say because children are born of parents who choose to be less or not involved at all in their lives, that gives us a moral out on giving that child a chance at the American dream. It's unacceptable to me. And I would hope it would be unacceptable to you. Because everybody here are either educators or care deeply about education. Are you really willing to live in a world that places failure as the only option at the feet of a child who can't pick his or her parent, can't pick the way they conduct themselves, whether their lack of involvement is because of drug and alcohol abuse, or whether it's because they're working 3 jobs to try to keep a roof over their heads? Whether the excuse for the lack of involvement is either morally commendable or morally damnable to you, the child cannot be the victim. And when we use that as an excuse for inaction, those who do it must live with the consequence. which is that we are making the child the victim. Now, it's not as if we're walking around in a dark room on education reform and can't find the light switch. There are light switches everywhere. There are examples everywhere of educational excellence brought forth by reform. The fallacy is that any one of them is perfect. It isn't. There is no silver bullet solution to this problem. The same way there aren't silver bullet solutions to any complex problem in a democratic society. So what do we need to do? To me, there are some simple but difficult steps which we need to perform. But all of them are based in common sense and rooted in the principle that we owe it to every child to do everything we can to give them every opportunity they can for greatness. Why is it that we still operate in a system that does not reward excellence and does not have any consequences for failure? The current tenure system is that system, and we know it. No one in our society, in my view, is entitled to a guaranteed job for life after 3 years and 1 day on a job. No one is entitled to that. But every good and great teacher is entitled to job security and safety from retaliatory and political firing if they are performing like in every other profession in America, except today, for the possible exception of the Congress of the United States. The fact is that we need to develop a system of evaluation of teachers which gives them the confidence to know that those judgments will be made based upon results that their students achieve and based upon the evaluation of their peer experts in their school. I don't believe this should be a controversial notion. No, it should not all be about student testing, but it should be about some student testing. And no, it shouldn't just be about peer evaluation, but peer evaluation has to play a large part in how we judge teachers. And tenure should be earned year after year after year based upon performance that produces results for children and their families, professional satisfaction for the professional teacher, and gets them the admiration and the copying of them by their peers. Once we can get to that point where tenure is earned and the one who has tenure is respected for their achievements, why shouldn't we pay those who are most excellent more than those who are not? In every other aspect of American society, we pay more for excellence. We reward achievement. We incentivize, in part with money. Yet in this most important profession in America, we somehow say that that can't work, that somehow it will destroy morale, that teachers will be competing with each other for money. Well, first off, having some more competition is probably a good thing. Secondly, if you believe that premise, then you believe there is no morale at Microsoft, and no morale at Facebook, and no morale at Caterpillar, and no morale at IBM, and no morale at any of the companies, big and small, in America, where every day they live by that competition. A pool of money that will be distributed to employees based upon excellence and achievement. Now, of course, you can shoot holes into anything. You say, well, this principal doesn't like me. This administrator has his or her favorites. We cannot make the perfect the enemy of the good. If you want to stop change, you can come up with any number of hypothetical circumstances that you could put as a roadblock to change. But failure is in front of us every day. And I want to keep great teachers in teaching, and I want to pay them more when they're achieving more, and incentivize them to stay through the incentives that are offered to every other great profession in America. You would think this could unite us. And if we agree on that general principle, then we could together sit and reason with each other to come up with a system that provides not absolute certainty, because no system will, but great confidence in the results it will produce. Charter schools are public schools. Let me repeat that again. Charter schools are public schools. Now, charter schools aren't needed in every school district in New Jersey, and I suspect not needed in every school district in most other states. In some school districts, the offering of a charter school would not add much to the educational opportunity of the students in that particular school district. But in a city like Newark, with that level of failure, charter schools, the good ones, are an oasis for parents who do not have the economic ability to choose another option for their children, but who know that they are confronted with failure and need something different for their child. Yes, there are bad charter schools too. And the bad charter schools should be closed. And in New Jersey, we are and will continue to close failing charter schools, the same way we should close failing traditional public schools. But again, that is not an excuse not to move forward with a broadening of opportunity in the charter movement. Are charter schools the silver bullet solution? Of course not. They are an element of the solution to this complex problem. In New Jersey, we're actively debating something called the Opportunity Scholarship Act, where in a certain number of failing districts in the state, districts that are judged objectively by the Department of Education to have failed as a district, that corporations that donate money for K-12 scholarships will receive tax credits to the state for that donation, and those scholarships will then be distributed to children and their families who are desperate for change. There's been much made in the past 2 months or so about the choices of two American political office holders, one Republican, one Democrat, one suburban, one urban, but both of whom are fathers. And we've been confronted about those choices. But I tell you these stories to prove a point. A couple months ago, I was confronted on a local call-in show about whether I have any validity in speaking about public education because my wife, Mary Pat, and I choose to send our children to parochial school. For those of you who saw it, I had kind of a direct response about whether it was the business of anybody about the choices that my wife and I make for our children's education, especially when we pay $38,000 a year in property taxes, 75% of which go to support our public schools, schools which we don't utilize. But I don't complain about that. It is my obligation as a citizen to support an excellent, free system of public education for all of New Jersey's children. And we pay ourselves for the parochial school that we choose for our children because we believe that that school system is what best supports the values that we're trying to teach them at home. In the city of Newark, many of those families don't have the choice that Mary Pat and I have. They might want to send their children to parochial school for the same reason or other reasons. But because of their economic circumstance, we don't give them that choice. And worse, if we were to send our children to our public school, they would get an excellent education. In Newark, they'd get a failed one. That's wrong. And in Chicago last week, the Democratic mayor of Chicago challenged about sending his children to the University of Chicago Laboratory School, a private school in Chicago. And when he said it was his choice and his wife's choice about what to do with their children's education, the reporter, parroting the words of opponents of education reform who are opposing the mayor, referred to his children as public property. And Mayor Rahm Emanuel, in a style that is uniquely his, responded directly and bluntly about the fact that it's he and his wife's choice to make for his children and not anybody else's. Now, the point of those two stories is twofold. One, this is not a Republican or Democratic issue, this issue of choice. It is an economic issue. Because a Democrat like Rahm Emanuel has the money to send his children to that private school, can choose to do so and not send them to the Chicago public school system. And a Republican governor like me can send my children to a parochial school because I choose to, not because of what party I belong to, but because we have the financial resources to do so. In a country that's worried about opportunity and fairness and justice for all of its citizens that can lead to excellence and opportunity, why should that choice just be limited to me and Rahm Emanuel and other people of means to make those choices? The Opportunity Scholarship Act and other acts like them do not mean, nor will they ever accomplish, the privatization of public schools. That's not my intention. I'm sure it's not Mayor Emanuel's intention. It is to offer choice to people who are desperate for something more, and for children who cannot wait any longer. You see, the people who oppose educational opportunity say, just give us some more time, we'll fix it. But our children only have 1 year in each grade. And every year that's wasted is a year they can never get back. I don't think any of us favor that. And if we don't, then maybe we could stop the arguing and bickering for a little while. Maybe we can put aside the personal self-interest of unions and politicians and decide to figure out what unites us and decide to take some risk, political risk, on both the politicians' part and on the part of those who jealously defend the status quo. To say that change is necessary does not mean you hate public education. And to say that change is necessary does not mean you're giving up on your profession. It is simply an acknowledgement of the truth. A truth that is displayed by the statistics I read about today in terms of where Iowa's education has gone in the last number of decades. A truth that's displayed in the eyes of the children I see at the Science High School in Newark, a specialty public school where 100% of the children go on to college. Those are eyes filled with hope and optimism in the middle of a sea of despair. That's what education provides for those children, and that's what it provided for all of us. You see, the America that I know and I believe, no one is guaranteed anything except an opportunity. An opportunity to use your God-given gifts as best you can. If we do not come to grips with the fact that we are denying that most basic American promise to millions of children in America today because we are unwilling or unable to make adults uncomfortable in favor of giving children a new chance, then we are going to fail as a great society in the years to come. It is uncomfortable, and it is difficult, and it is emotional, because we all care deeply about this issue. And we can fight about it for years and years to come if that's what we choose to do. And there are passionate people on both sides of the issue. Or we can decide today that the interest of these children is more important than how we define political winning and losing. So I came to Iowa today not to throw down the gauntlet of the next battle in this fight, although it is a battle I am willing to have if forced to. I came to Iowa today at the invitation of a governor who has a reputation throughout his career of bringing people together, which is why I believe Iowa's turned to him once again during some of our most difficult times to bring us together again as a people. Because we must find common ground on this issue, because the clock is ticking, everybody, and children's lives are wasting as we dawdle. I don't have to win every argument. I haven't won every argument in New Jersey, and I don't expect I will. But the principles that we talked about today should be things that we can agree upon and find principled compromise to accomplish. Understanding that there are no guarantees of success, but that if we stay on the course we're on today, there is a certain guarantee of failure for our children and for our country's future. So I hope, as you've been listening today to the various people who have spoken to you, and as you continue to listen and as you leave here from this summit, you will leave here continue to be committed to public education and the greatness of public education in America, and that your mind is opened just a little bit to the idea that change is necessary. It will be difficult and painful and challenging, but the only thing worse will be a continuation of a failed status quo that will inevitably lead to America being a second-rate intellectual and economic power in the world. And if that happens, the great morality that America projects across the world will be lost at the same time. And then the world will be a lesser place for our unwillingness or inability to act. I want to thank you for your commitment to this important issue. I want to thank the governor for his invitation to be here, and I look forward to watching the magic that I am sure will happen in Iowa as you return to become one of the best public education systems in America once again. Thank you all very much.